Welcome to Newsday. Reporting live from Singapore, I'm Mariko Oi. The headlines. Colorado's Supreme Court disqualifies Donald Trump from the Republican presidential primary in the state over the 2021 Capitol attack. Gas pollution warning for Reykjavik after spectacular volcano eruption in southwest Iceland. Aid agencies voice frustration at the worsening conditions for civilians in Gaza as the UN Security Council delays voting on a draft ceasefire resolution. Volodymyr Zelensky tells an end-of-year news conference he's confident that Ukraine's Western allies won't let it down.
Live from our studio in Singapore. This is BBC News. It's Newsday.
Hi there, thank you for being with us. We begin with a developing story in the United States. The Colorado Supreme Court has disqualified Donald Trump from the state's presidential primary election next year. In its ruling, the court says it's because of his role in the Capitol attack in January 2021. Trump's campaign immediately denounced the ruling as undemocratic and said they would appeal to the U.S. Supreme Court. Let's bring in our North America correspondent, Peter Bose, who joins us live. Peter, the ruling applies only to the state's Republican primary. So what does this decision mean?
Well, this, as you say, applies only to the Republican primary in Colorado. But the warning shot for Donald Trump is, of course, that this could ultimately apply to other states as well. We know that there have been lawsuits in other parts of the country. In fact, some lawsuits have been unsuccessful, although there are also appeals underway. But it is a warning shot to Donald Trump that at least the legal system in this country has the power, it seems, to ban him from standing in the election, the presidential election next year. And this all stems from an effort by a group of citizens in Colorado to stop former President Trump seeking the White House again. It has now gone to that state's Supreme Court, invoking the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, very rarely used part of the Constitution, but which says that anyone that is essentially found guilty of insurrection or rebellion should not be allowed to stand for the presidency again. Now, Donald Trump has been very quick to respond to this, at least his campaign has, saying that they will take this to the U.S. Supreme Court. So this may not be the final decision.
Indeed, Peter, and we are showing our viewers live pictures from Waterloo in Iowa, where Mr. Trump is speaking to his supporters. But in terms of Colorado, Peter, Joe Biden only won the state in 2020 with a margin of more than 13%. So not exactly a big target for Mr. Trump. Are there any other battleground states where Mr. Trump's presence on the ballot is being challenged?
Well, yes, there have been, in fact, several states already, including the state of Arizona, which is definitely one of those battleground states. But so far, those attempts have been turned down by the courts. Now, as I just said, the Colorado decision may well be heading to the U.S. Supreme Court, and there are appeals underway in those other cases. So this is all very much still up in the air as it applies to Colorado, but some of those other states as well. But it is just yet another issue for Donald Trump and his campaign to be concerned about, to eat into their time, to their legal resources to fight this particular case, on top, of course, of the other lawsuits and the criminal prosecutions that he's facing around the country.
And briefly, before we let you go, as you said, this could end up in the Supreme Court. Mr. Trump appears confident that he will win, calling three of them my justices as he appointed them. Just talk us through his response to this ruling.
Well, yes, and we haven't heard him respond directly. As you say, he is speaking at this rally right now, and it is widely expected that at some point during this speech he will talk about this. But his campaign issued a statement saying that this was flawed, this was un-American, this decision of the Supreme Court in Colorado, that it was undemocratic. So you get the gist of what they're saying. They believe that the law is on their side, and that's what clearly they will fight for in the US Supreme Court.
Peter Bowes, thank you so much for updating us on that developing story from the United States. Now to Iceland, where there's been a dramatic volcano eruption, sending lava spewing hundreds of meters into the sky. I want to show you these live pictures from southwestern Iceland as the volcano continues to spew jets of molten lava from a crack in the earth that's now several kilometers long. The area is a volcanic and seismic hotspot not far from the capital, Reykjavik. Experts say the eruption could last possibly weeks or maybe even months. Our correspondent Sofia Batiza is following the story and sent us this update.
Well, this is as close as we could get to the volcano, which you should be able to see right there behind me in the distance. And that's because the authorities here are urging people not to come to this area for their safety and also to allow scientists to assess the situation on the ground. But I can tell you, we can smell the smoke, we can see ashes floating in the air. From time to time, we can hear, we can feel the vibration underneath our feet, and we can definitely hear the sound of the volcano rumbling in the background. And just to give you an idea of the situation, as we were driving here from the capital Reykjavik, which is about 40 minutes away, we could immediately see the orange jets of lava in the distance, and that gives you an idea of just how powerful this volcanic eruption is. Now, in the past few hours, we've seen people here taking selfies, taking videos, but that's mostly tourists. So we spoke to people from the US, from the UK and from India who were here on holiday but wanted to come here and see this in real life, because they've told us that this seems like something out of a movie, something that feels like a once in a lifetime experience. But when you speak to people from Iceland, they'll tell you a very different story. I spoke to a policeman who told me that for people here who live here, this is just a regular Tuesday. Now, of course, that might be an exaggeration, but this is a country that is used to volcanic eruption. The authorities here say that they have everything under control, that this does not pose a threat to life, that they had been expecting this to happen for weeks, and as a precaution, they have evacuated a nearby town. Now, the good news is that in the last few hours, the intensity of the eruption has been decreasing. And according to forecasts, in the next few days, the wind is going to push away the smoke from the inhabited areas. And that is very good news for thousands of people who have been evacuated and are hoping to be able to come home, to come back to their homes for Christmas.
Sofia Batiza reporting there. And a little earlier, I spoke to Carmen Solano, who specialises in volcanology and risk communications at the University of Portsmouth in the UK. And I started by asking her how concerned we should be about gas pollution hitting the capital.
Obviously, I mean, in the UK, we don't have anything to fear. There is no, at the moment, the eruption and even this pollution shouldn't produce any problems. In terms of Reykjavik, the capital of Iceland, the change of wind direction means that some of the gases that are coming out of the fissure, they're going to be moving towards the capital. And I believe that the Icelandic Meteorological Office and Civil Protection has recommended people to stay indoors and to close the windows so they're not exposed to high concentrations. Of course, it depends if the wind is strong, it's going to move closer to the ground. If it is maybe it's not that strong, maybe it will go more upwards. There are very many factors that will change the concentration and therefore the impact that could have on the population.
Many of our viewers will remember a similar eruption back in 2010, which of course created that ash cloud, resulting in at least several days of air travel disruption. Is there any danger for that happening this time again?
No, it was a very different eruption, actually. That eruption happened underneath a glacier. So that was underneath like a cup of ice. And because of this contact water with magma, it creates a lot of explosivity, a little bit like oil with water. So that change of temperature and also the composition means that there are big explosions. There's a lot of ash created. It ascends much higher into the atmosphere, the distribution is further. So it's a very different type of eruption. In here, what we're seeing is mainly lava flows coming from this fissure, which now is becoming some vents, and mainly ash, but mainly gases, but very little ash.
While volcanic eruptions aren't unique in Iceland, I understand that this particular area hasn't had an eruption for some 800 years until several years ago. Could this be the start of decades of eruption?
Yes, well, that's what I believe everybody's fearing, that the area has reactivated after a long time, and it could mean that they leave eruptions in regular intervals. The first one was in 2021, and that was followed by another one in 2022, and actually, at the beginning of this year, there was another eruption. They were a little bit smaller in terms of the fractures. The eruptive fissures were a little bit smaller than in this case. And of course, the precursory activity wasn't as damaging. But yes, it looks like the area has reactivated. So, I mean, we fear that it might be the beginning of a series of eruptions in the area. And they're so close to Reykjavik. Of course, the risk is higher than previously, when most of the eruptions were happening on the east of Iceland.
Carmen Solana speaking to me a little earlier. Now, a vote at the United Nations Security Council on a resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza has been postponed once again. The vote was first delayed on Monday, and after today's delay, it's now scheduled for Wednesday. The United States has said it was working with other members of the Security Council to resolve outstanding issues. They are trying to agree wording which would persuade Washington not to use its veto. Our correspondent Neda Tawfik is following the story for us from New York.
Intense negotiations continue here at the United Nations to try to reach an agreement that would avoid a U.S. veto on this resolution. Now, we've already seen this vote postponed numerous times over the last 2 days, and we'll see if a vote on Wednesday morning sticks. But the United States has said it is against a ceasefire along with Israel because they feel it would only benefit Hamas. And therefore, there is still disagreement on some of the language around a cessation of hostilities. Even though the draft has been watered down to instead call for a suspension, there is still a phrase that calls for urgent steps towards a sustainable cessation of hostilities. The United States also has issues with this call for a UN monitoring mechanism for aid into Gaza to be established. Now, Israel is fearful that that would take its control away from the delivery of humanitarian aid. And so diplomats are trying to bridge the gap on that point of the resolution as well. So while diplomats had initially believed they were very close to an agreement, we can see that the language here is being toughly negotiated. The United States says it is engaging with council members constructively with these outstanding issues, but they fully support addressing the humanitarian needs of the people in Gaza. And indeed, the United States is facing pressure in that regard. We have seen the UN say that a ceasefire is necessary so that they can deliver aid at scale in a meaningful way. And Security Council members heard from Tor Wennesland, the UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East peace process, saying that the delivery of aid into Gaza continues to face insurmountable challenges and that the limited steps by Israel fall short of what is needed to address the humanitarian catastrophe catastrophe on the ground. So, as I say, intense negotiations continue at the United Nations.
Meanwhile, the Palestinian Islamic Jihad group has published a video with 2 hostages being held in Gaza, urging the Israeli government to engage in negotiations for their release. The group took part in the October the 7th attacks alongside Hamas. The men identify themselves as Gadi Moses, 79, and Elad Katza, 47. They were kidnapped from Kibbutz Nizar and appear separately in 2 clips. They both warn that Israel's bombings are endangering their lives. Prisoners of war and hostages are protected under international humanitarian law, so the BBC does not broadcast the full details of material which may have been filmed under duress. Earlier, Israeli President Isaac Herzog said his country was ready for another humanitarian pause to enable more hostages to be released and more aid to be delivered. But Hamas has said that it won't negotiate an exchange of prisoners as long as the Israeli military operation continues in Gaza. A source has told the BBC that the leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, is expected to visit Cairo on Wednesday. From Jerusalem,
New signs of movement towards possible negotiations between Israel and Hamas for the release of more hostages being held in Gaza and also for more humanitarian aid to be delivered to the territory. On Wednesday, the leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, is expected to visit Cairo. Egypt, alongside Qatar, helped negotiate the first deal that saw the release of more than 100 hostages and also Palestinian prisoners being freed from Israeli jails. On Tuesday, the Israeli president said his country was ready for another humanitarian pause in Gaza. That followed meetings between the Israeli and American intelligence chiefs and the Qatari prime minister. But any negotiations are unlikely to be easy. Hamas has conditioned any exchanges on a comprehensive ceasefire in Gaza. Israel so far has rejected calls for a ceasefire, saying that this would only benefit Hamas, a position that has been supported by the country's main ally, the United States. More than 100 captives remain in Gaza, and Israel says the release of the hostages and also the elimination of Hamas are the goals of its military offensive in Gaza.
Hugo Bashoga reporting there. Around the world and across the UK, this is BBC News. Let's now take a look at some other stories making news for you. And the Scottish Government has announced a new 45% ban for people earning over £75,000, meaning higher earners in Scotland will be paying more income tax. The top rate, which is paid by those earning more than £125,000, will also rise to 48%. The Housing Secretary announces a pledge to intervene if there have been delays to house buildings as a result of poor performance among planning teams. Michael Gove says that he will call out local authorities that are dragging their feet when it comes to processing housing applications. A health think tank warns the traditional model of dentistry in the NHS is gone for good. The Nuffield Trust says the service has been cut back so much it's now at the most perilous position in its 75-year history in England. The government says it will be publishing a recovery plan soon. You're live with BBC News. Now, it's almost 2 years now since the Russian full-scale invasion sparked the battle for Ukraine. Today, President Zelensky and Russia's Vladimir Putin have both publicly insisted that they will be the ultimate winners in this long drawn-out war. The Ukrainian president admitted his country is facing challenges, but said he was confident its allies would not let him down. Our Europe correspondent Jessica Parker reports from Kyiv.
President Zelensky's looking at whether to mobilise 500,000 more soldiers as these men in the east battle with not only Russia but ammunition shortages and the icy grip of winter.
It's cold, wet and grey, but we need to do our job. There's no other option. We'll kick out these evil spirits as soon as possible and go home to our families.
Президент України Володимир Зеленський.
In Kyiv, he has to answer for a largely stalled counter-offensive. But President Zelensky insists it's Russia that's failing on the front line as he fielded questions at a rare press conference. You are facing a lot of problems at the moment, wavering Western support, manpower shortages as well. Russia is on the attack in some areas. So I really do want to press you on this. Is there a danger that Ukraine could be on the cusp of starting to lose this war?
No. I don't think so. We were in the most difficult situation, and we were almost fully occupied. The risk you are talking about, it always exists. But we have to live here in Ukraine and to fight and keep faith, not in words, but actions to achieve results.
You'd expect President Zelensky to be defiant and determined. He is Ukraine's leader, responsible for rallying a nation at war. But there's no disguising that this is not the kind of triumphant end-of-year address he might have dreamed of making. Few doubt Ukraine's will to dig in and fight. Here they hope that big but blocked supplies of Western weapons and money will come. But for now, there's big uncertainty, rarely an advantage in war. Jessica Parker, BBC News.
And now to Russia, where President Putin met the country's top military leaders. Our Russia editor Steve Rosenberg has more.
A minute's silence for soldiers killed. Then, a rallying cry from Russia's commander-in-chief. On the war in Ukraine, Vladimir Putin claimed his troops have the advantage now, despite Western support for Kyiv.
All attempts to inflict a military defeat on us, a strategic defeat, as the West called it, these attempts have been shattered by the courage and persistence of our soldiers. They have come up against the increased might of our armed forces and the resources of Russian industry and military production.
Across Moscow, Russians are being told in no uncertain terms, victory will be ours, and Russia, the country of winners. Although to many here, what exactly would constitute victory in this war is unclear. And outside the US Embassy, no tinsel, just trolling.
So these letters, these are the symbols of what the Kremlin still calls its special military operation in Ukraine. And that reads, to victory. And all of this right on the doorstep of the American embassy. A less than subtle hint to the West that this is a war Vladimir Putin has no intention of losing.
He has every intention of winning the upcoming election too, which he's registering to run in. Mr. Putin will know that his toughest critics and potential rivals won't be on the ballot. Like Alexei Navalny. He tried to run for president last time round, but it was barred. Since then, the Kremlin critic has survived a nerve agent attack and received a 19-year prison sentence. His lawyers say that right now, they don't know where he is. It's thought he may be in transit from this maximum security jail to one of Russia's harshest penal colonies. Vladimir Putin has defeated his most vocal opponents at home. Many are in jail or in exile. For the Kremlin leader, next year will be all about trying to defeat President Zelensky. Steve Rosenberg, BBC News, Moscow.
Now to China, where at least 127 people have died after an earthquake struck a northwestern country. The epicenter of the quake was in the remote Gansu province, but tremors were also felt in the neighboring Qinghai region, and another quake was also reported in Xinjiang. Our correspondent Laura Bicker sent us this report.
The only warning was a low rumble before the strong, shallow quake turned village homes into rubble. Bedrooms of small brick houses crumbled. People were buried as they slept. Hundreds of rescuers in 2 remote provinces spent the night digging to find survivors, knowing the first few hours of any earthquake are critical to save lives. Some were pulled from the debris. More than 500 people were taken to hospital. This commander told the media that his teams had rescued 60 people from the rubble in the worst-hit province of Gansu. Those who'd managed to flee their homes did their best to huddle together to keep warm in freezing temperatures. The BBC was sent this video from a member of the local Muslim community who told us 50 people died in his village. He said the scenes were heart-wrenching, too tragic to look at. China's response has been swift. Hundreds of people now need shelter in villages scattered across the Tibetan plateau, while the country is experiencing one of its coldest winters in decades. Rescuers said the temperatures were difficult to endure. But while some people are still missing, they're also determined to keep going. Laura Bicker, BBC News, Beijing.
That is it for this edition of Newsday. Of course, a lot more on our website on all the stories that we brought you here on Newsday. So do check that out as well. I'll be back with business news shortly. But for now, thank you so much for watching Newsday.